Welcome to the Atheist Christian Book Club for February. Our book this time is by Antony Flew, and it is There Is a God. How many of you have gotten to read at least part of it? Okay. How many got to read the whole thing? Great. Excellent.
How many people saw the debate?
I did.
Paul saw the road wreck, which was a...
Yeah.
Did you find it terrible?
Terrible.
I thought,
I thought it was great. What are you talking about?
Yeah, right.
I love that when the black preacher has to defend slavery. He's like,
Did he recommend the John Anker?
It was that bad.
I think he's talking about the other one.
oh,
He's talking about the one that I sent out by the email with
oh, no,
Flew versus Habermas.
oh, never mind. I thought we were talking about the Bible group.
I thought John Ankerberg was going to end, Gary Habermas was going to read him the 4 spiritual laws and invite him to accept Jesus. I mean, it was pitiful.
That was the point, right?
Yeah.
That was their point.
Well,
This wasn't hitting hard fast.
But I mean, when you're in a debate and Antony Flew goes, boy, that's a good point. That's magnificent.
I know. I thought he was. He seemed like he was not with it.
I talked to Gary Habermas about this, and I asked him there were 3 debates, and Habermas said get the first one at Liberty because he was already beginning to have second thoughts on the last 2, and he said the last one's the worst. He said the atheists were complaining, put anybody up there, draw a name, and so. The first one was when he was the most adamant about about being an atheist. And he was already he wouldn't did you notice he wouldn't commit to almost anything, so anyway, so I couldn't find on video the first debate. I found a transcript of it, but not a video, but that's what Gary told me on that. So bottom line is the book is from a Christian perspective. How many of you are new? This is your first time to be at the Atheist Christian Book Club? 1, 2,
There's
3.
some seats over here.
Yeah, there's 2 wooden chairs. Have we used up the wooden chairs yet? Too?
No, the wooden chairs are still over
There's still one. I see one of them right there. So I think there's
The
one
wooden chairs
more.
are back there.
That you could probably be right where you are, but actually have a seat.
And then there's
we have
festival
the,
seating beyond that.
That's right out there. You have plenty of room now? Yeah. You do?
But you were sitting in that, right?
I'm letting that I
Is
move.
that good?
I'm gonna get my jacket up. Do you want this chair?
If you have a chair, sure.
Yeah, we have it right here. There's another one even.
Okay.
Oh,
This is a good problem to have, but there's a problem.
Right there.
So, those who are new, we do this as first Friday of every month. We alternate almost always. I think we have so far always. Atheist book, Christian book, atheist book, Christian book. So we'll be looking at an atheist book. We have one in mind. We always are open to suggestions, alternatives, and things like that. Bill and I try to get something picked out ahead of time, which we've got one I think will be dovetailed really well with some of the issues that were brought up in the Flew book. I was telling some others here that I'm coming from a Christian perspective, and I've had a relationship with the Metroplex Atheists due to Bill.
Due to Julio.
Due to Julio, so indirectly, Julio's kind of the grandfather of this whole
Yes.
thing, you could say. So Bill came to see me when I was speaking at Cottonwood. What city is that in? Cottonwood Creek in Allen. Yeah, Cottonwood Creek in Allen. And he was functioning unofficially as like Metroplex Atheists outreach director. That's the way he explained it to me. So unofficial outreach director, and he said he wanted to ask me if they could do a Meet an Atheist Sunday at Cottonwood. Well, I'm the guest. That's not my church. I can't give you an okay on that, So it's like I'm just a guest here, just like you. And so, but he was kind enough to stay for the sermon and was very complimentary.
Oh, yeah.
Said he enjoyed it and stuff like that. So he said, "You live in Arlington. There's this thing called the Fellowship of the Metroplex Atheists." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yes, it's a place called Gilligan's." I said, "Gilligan's? I would walk. I wouldn't even get in the car. It's just right down the street." So Bill came by. This was 3 years ago, about. Came by and we talked for about an hour in my office, and he took me down. We went down there, and he introduced me to that time the president, Randy Word was president at the time, and some others, and for about a year, at least once or twice a month, I would go up there. We would have all kinds of good conversations, and we've kind of moved that now to hooligans, and everybody's welcome to come to hooligans. It's usually every other Thursday. It runs from 4 to 8, and it is most people don't stay. I mean, you can come in for 1 hour, half an hour, whatever, but it kind of goes from 4 to 8 p.m. And Hooligans is right next to Gilligan's, right down the street. There's just a pub, and you're welcome to go to that. But anyway, Bill was after me for quite a while to do something, and so we kind of hit on the idea of the book club. But I already had a relationship with most of the atheists that were here, and we were already friends, pretty much friends at that point, much better friends now, I would think. So we are not here to attack or to ridicule. Don't hold back. I mean, we get intense conversations in here sometimes, but always respectful and friendly conversation. In fact, I would say it's not friendly conversation. We're beyond that. We are friends at this point. So that's kind of what we try to do on this. It's helpful for me because you get real stale if you don't hear any new ideas, and you don't get challenged. And this is a thing that I've shared with some of you guys before, but I noticed that all my ideas sound brilliant in church. So get outside, get in a place like this. I find out some of my ideas are not as good as others. So this helps me. It helps me, I think, be a better thinker. I hope I'm a better thinker, and it also builds some fellowship both with Christians and atheists. I'm surprised about how much I find I have a lot more in common than I thought I did on a lot of different issues. One thing about the people that come to this club typically, even though if we're on opposite sides of the issue, we all agree this is the issue. I mean, this is everything. Right? Everything stands or falls on this question: is there a God? And your worldview affects everything that you do and the way you think. And so I'm glad that you're willing to take time out of your month, a day a month, to do this, plus the time to read the book. So anyway, welcome to the club, and we're going to discuss our book this time. And anybody feel free to, Antony Flew's book, feel free to hop in at any point. But I wanted to start off maybe by, letting Bill, what was your idea as a thinking atheist? You read the book, and what was your...
I thought his arguments were outstanding. Well, I mean, the fine-tuning arguments have always been, pretty formidable to atheists. And, when we read Hugh Ross, all those, and what he said, just the profundity of fine-tuning arguments. There are just so many of them. I think Hugh Ross is just like 3 to 800, and, we're just waiting for Chris to get us out of this jam, right? Where's Chris? Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So he's got his notebook.
I know everything.
Yeah, so help our unbelief here.
Now that I've been set up, you brought the fine-tune argument. That's something that's come up with in multiple books that we've read. It's very common.
Could you summarize it for those of us?
It's the idea that there's a lot of math behind the universe. There's a lot of laws of physics. There's a lot of values for universal constants that really need to be just so in order for planets to form, for the Big Bang not to collapse in on itself. It makes it look like everything had to be. The idea is that there had to be someone arranging those numbers in the perfect way. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a universe. We wouldn't have life. The science behind that is weird, and I'm not an expert in it by any sense, but he kind of goes into the only way you can combat that is to go to multiverse theory, and multiverse theory is unproven, it's speculative, which is true. We haven't figured out a way to break out of our universe and see what other universes have going on. But that's part of the problem for the fine-tuning argument in my mind. Also, we don't have other universes to compare against. We only have this one. We don't know, the way it's always presented by apologists is that the Big Bang goes boom, and that exact second a whole bunch of dials are being spun. one for the force of gravity, one for the strong magnetic force, one for the weak magnetic force, and all these dials are being spun. And they were trying to act like they all had to line up perfectly or else we get nothing. And the fact that they coincidentally all landed on the same number, on the right numbers, means there's a God setting them that way. But he never establishes that there are dials at all. He never establishes that it could be any different. For all we know, those numbers could be an inherent part of what it means to be a universe, just as a number 3 is inherent in what it means to be a triangle. And that's the way I tend to come at those objectives.
So did you find those arguments compelling, the fine-tuning arguments?
Well, for the reason I just stated, I mean, it comes up. I mean, maybe there's a scientific, there's more scientific stuff here going on that I'm just not aware of. It's certainly possible, but it seems like it's based on assumptions that, you know, it's because we have numbers means that we have a range of numbers that we could be working with.
But then you're going back to a causeless event, though, right?
Well,
Big Bang
that's an entirely different objection.
And I was just kind of triggered by something you said there, but I don't mean to sidetrack you from the main point here, right?
But you sound like it's like hitting the lottery, the numbers.
Well, that's how apologists typically present it.
I'm not buying it.
Well,
That's
no,
cool.
and James has said, I thought was a good comment, that you don't have to hit the lottery one time, you've got to hit it several times. Isn't that what you said?
To me, it's compelling because I think this is why everybody that I read, Krauss and everybody else, is so quick to run multiverse, because they realize the problem here. Assuming that there's one universe, if you just assume that for a minute, and you only have one Big Bang, it's remarkable that you have that matter, energy, space, and time come into existence, and in some powerful explosion, and you rarely see explosions create order. It is not just something came into existence, everything did. And so to me, it's like you only have one bang. So I think the multiverse is a way of saying, well, if there's an infinite number of universes, and let's say they all explode differently, one of them does hit exactly right. At least one, the one we're in. And the very fact that we're observing, and I've heard that argument, means that it makes sense because a universe that couldn't form carbon and couldn't form carbon-based life, there would be no observers to complain about it. So yes, the fact that we observe means that you can't have a universe, which means that it's possible apart from God.
But if you're just going to make up some imaginary, and I don't mean to make fun of the theory, but if your multiverse is just a made-up thought, and I mean, if you're going to do that, you could just make up a bunch of other reasons why God exists, or for any other argument that you wanted to put forward.
Yeah, what is multiverse?
Well, the
Like
concept
your understanding of it.
that there are multiple to infinite numbers of universes existing, and like they always say dimensions. You know, it's kind of hard for me to conceive of what that is, right? But that is my understanding.
That's one possible way to look at it. Another way to look at it is it's everything that's just beyond the cosmic microwave background radiation, just extending out to infinity. So, like, we can't see beyond where light has been, and it's got an absolute speed limit, but it doesn't mean that the universe doesn't extend to infinity beyond the background radiation there.
Yeah, true. The observable universe is expanding, but what's on the other side of it? That's right.
And there are other theories about what is causing what appears to be expansion. Other theories, maybe it isn't expanding, depending on a lot of just weird factors like quarks and quantum fields and God particles or whatever, Higgs bosons and things like that. It's in the realm of we don't know. I don't know. I haven't done the experiments.
I could ask Chris a question, and I know Julio, I saw your hand up, so maybe come to you after. On that thought, would you consider the fine-tuning variation of God of the Gaps?
Yeah, I think it falls into, well, I don't know if this is specifically God of the Gaps, but it's a science doesn't know, but we know because we believe in God. And I think that comes up multiple times in this book and other arguments also, the idea that the fact that science doesn't have all the answers and may not ever have all the answers means that that's somehow a victory for the Christian side, or the theist side, I should say.
Just real quick, I was going to say, where do you get the numbers from?
Which numbers?
Number for like the probability factors of all this effects on.
Well, they're constants. The
Measurable.
gravitational constant has a specific number. The electromagnetic force between
Okay.
the weak and nuclear.
We had
I guess
a whole
not
book,
figure out-
two books actually we dealt with early in the club where we really dug into that. And,
Oh, that's why I don't.
that's why, but it's basically amazing that you had the Christian astronomer, Hugh Ross, and the atheist cosmologist, Lawrence Krauss, and I was amazed that it seemed like 80% or more they were agreeing with each other as they were talking about the science, the age of the universe, expansion rates, and in fact Krauss's whole book is trying to answer that question: how can you get a whole universe out of nothing? And I think Sam mentioned this, that he was disappointed in the book because he felt that Lawrence Krauss equivocated, starting off by this is what nothing, and this is why it's important because there was no matter, energy, space, or time before the singularity. But then halfway through the book, he kind of redefines nothing as very much something: dark energy, dark matter,
Space time.
Quantum vacuum.
quantum vacuums, yeah, which are highly unstable apparently. Yeah. So, but anyway, that's we've had a whole history on that, which is unfair to try to expect you guys to know.
But there's something called six numbers, which are incredible. These six numbers have to be precisely fine-tuned.
Just the rate of expansion when the first millisecond, if it's off by a fraction, and this book, Krauss says this too, the atheist, then you not only don't get stars needed for planets, you don't even get the periodic table. You only get hydrogen and helium is basically all you get. And so if it's too much, then these elements can't form the periodic table. If it's too little, the universe collapses back on itself. And if I'm understanding Chris correctly, what Chris is saying is we don't know the answer to that, neither the Christian nor the atheist.
Yeah, because
So it's really where Flew would say that he changed his position, that he seems to him that something intelligent is behind it.
that's just guess.
It would be fair to say that would be a guess on his part as well as on the part of the atheist and how it happened.
Sorry, what was the?
In other words, the God of the gaps. We don't know. Science could later on come up with an explanation for that.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a long history of things being ascribed to gods that turn out later to be the result of natural processes, and I don't know if we discover something that points to God later, but that has not been the trend. The trend usually is pointing away from God.
I would disagree with that. I would think that physics is more pointing towards some of these creationist arguments that Flew is putting forward.
And that's certainly Flu's interpretation of others. Which
Well, I should have said that that's the way he looks at it, didn't he, too?
I could see where all these discoveries only raise more questions, and I can see the appeal of looking at things that way, but that's like literally the definition of God gaps is whatever gaps in scientific knowledge are. You put God in there, and as scientific knowledge expands, God is fluid. He just flows into whatever the new gaps are.
But it certainly could be coincidental, and I'm not saying this proves anything's true or not. But it is interesting that the ancient theologians were talking about a universe out of nothing, which sounded great until the Enlightenment comes along. And then you have the steady state model, and then it seems like almost all scientists were saying, everybody knows that matter can either be created or destroyed. We all know we have an eternal universe. And so this idea of God's creating out of nothing is ridiculous, but it does seem like modern cosmology is saying, well, no, the universe did come out of something that's not matter, energy, space, or time. Something that's immaterial, maybe not spiritual, might not be the best term for it, but something immaterial at least, because the all matter is the effect, not the cause.
Yeah, that's why I would say it's not necessarily God of the gaps, because you're not saying, well, I guess some people could be saying, like, I'm 100% sure. It's just like Occam's razor is, in light of all the information we have, what is the most probable And so, to me, I would say, well, it just seems more probable that God exists and set these things into place specifically on this argument, not even bringing the other ones, but it's not like 100% truth. And saying like, well, eventually science is just going to tell us is, to me, just the God of the gaps. You just replace God with science.
Well, it's always going to be easier to say God did something. Sometimes the truth is complicated. Like I started today in Phoenix and I wound up here.
Fair.
Is it more easier to say that I got driven to the airport, took a plane, and got driven here, or to say that God proved me here? It's easier to say God proved me here.
Where would the evidence be?
Yeah, but see, it's in light
charge
of
for
all
luggage.
the evidence, not in spite of. That's my point.
Do you know the evidence? Have you done the experiments?
Are you asking if I've gone through and done everything? No, of course I have not.
Right.
You have to, at some point, everybody stands on the shoulder of giants. And there's no way anybody here can pretend like they've done every experiment in every field.
That's
Yeah.
actually my point, is that we don't know. These people, they're in a better position maybe to know, but we don't know what they know. We can't really confirm or deny their positions or their assessments or their mathematics. We don't know the math. We don't know the science. We don't know the theories. We're not part of the discourse. We're just kind of out here on the fringes guessing, and it seems silly to me to just like stamp one way or the other. And I say that, you know,
Somebody stamping it one way.
yeah, like so it would be ridiculous saying just saying, oh yeah, Big Bang, or yeah, multiverse, or yeah, this, or yeah, that. We don't know.
So
why
basically,
take a position?
so Sam, so basically, we got a lot in common. We're both putting our faith in something.
No, I'm saying
We're trusting. Well, let me rephrase that. We're both trusting in something. I mean, you're obviously trusting some data, some scientist work.
All I'm doing is saying, I know what these guys have said.
Mhm.
That's all I'm doing. Just reporting what I know that they said. That's all I can do. That's all any of us
Well,
can do.
Hugh Ross, his reasons.org, and he lists the 600 fine-tuning arguments, and he has a testable creation model. So he's more of a scientist type, and he's an old earther, so he's with the consensus of science. But he says he has a model that he can prove. Whereas someone like Answers to Genesis are just going to say, "Yep, just believe it and let be done with it." What are we going to say?
I think the important thing here is to say, is it just people with a Christian bias who are making the claims for these numbers, these constants, these variables in the universe, or are they in agreement with non-Christian scientists? And in the case of the fine-tuning arguments, there's widespread agreement completely across, regardless of personal worldview.
Right.
Let me give you an example.
I hear Christians say that, but from what I understand, I don't think that's really the case.
Well, I can't prove that here tonight.
Because,
But
like for instance, one of the common things that I hear is like they'll point to some constant, and how many zeros are after the decimal, and this is blah 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 blah. The reason why they result in these weird numbers and decimals is because the units are arbitrary units based upon human experience. When you work the math backwards, starting from those constants, the numbers work out quite a bit differently. It's not as cut and dry that like, oh, these were like tweaked to some like weird decimal place. It's like, no, it appears to be in this position and it works with the math, but we don't have a causal explanation for why this thing needs to be here, or even what it
Working
is.
back to what number? I got sort of,
Yeah.
that seemed a little vague, and my fault. I'm not really tracking what you're trying to say.
You take what it is that's being measured, and rather than defining it as, seconds squared over meters squared per kiloparsec or something like that, you flip it around and you define it in terms of its geometry and assign it a value of 1, and where does the rest of the math result from there? And things come out
You
looking
don't think
different.
our math is based on the way reality is pi or e or other such constants? Are those based on observations of the universe as it is?
They are.
I mean, they're not arbitrary.
No, like the gravitational constant, it's like 9 numbers long. They would all agree on that constant.
Yeah,
And they all agree on the math.
Human
And
consensus
what I'm
that we've
saying
all
is
just
the
agreed
unit.
that's what it is.
Take a look at the unit.
And to make this more concrete, just to take one example out of the 600 that Bill mentioned, or one of the 6 or 8 really big ones in terms of the universe. The force that holds protons together in the nucleus of every atom, that's a weak force, that's a strong force. The strong force. Possibly things repel each other. If that isn't exactly perfect, then if it were off like 1 part in a trillion, many trillions, either stronger or weaker, everything would be hydrogen, 1 proton, 1 electron, or nothing. There'd be no periodic table. And this is something scientists don't disagree on.
Even the atheist sides do say that there's the appearance of design.
But when
And scientists don't agree on that.
how do you know that?
And how do you know that they do?
But Sam, your whole argument seems to be always just we can't know anything. And if
that's not true.
And if that's where
It's
we
that
go,
what
then
we
why are we
can
even
know-
having a
It's
conversation?
that we can know something. This is what we know. And it's focusing on, okay, what do we actually know?
So what is the
Rather
this that
than-
we know? In this specific argument, what is the this that we know that we can start on?
It's better to focus on what you individually know. That's the point.
So since we can't know what scientists worldwide agree on, then it's not valid.
It may or may not be.
And this is
I think
the truth is relative.
No,
It's
I
not-
don't think. I don't think there's any question as to what the constants are. And I mean, that's not universal. But how you interpret those constants is very much.
Absolutely.
Like this was this, but when you look at it, you can look at it from one angle or the other.
Well, let me make my point a little bit different way. Because Connor mentioned pi. Pi is a constant. Every circle has that number of 3.14, et cetera, et cetera.
Except for square circle.
Okay, but so pi is a constant. If pi were a little bit off, we wouldn't have any circles. Do you think God set the value for pi?
No, I wasn't making that point. I was making.
I know. I am making that point.
Like E, for example, is based on natural observation of nature. So
So how?
It's not a physics.
It's a way. It's a way of describing how the mathematical relationship between a circle and its things. Okay. That's.
And philosophers carry on and on about whether math existed
I'm sure Flew would love to get into that. But my point is, it's our way. It's not something that someone wrote down someday, and that's how circles work. That's the number. That's how we figured out.
I see what you're
Let
saying.
me do this if I can, just kind of give us a little break here on the discussion. Very good discussion so far, by the way. I did, if you read in the book, you probably saw Gary Habermas, who's the professor at philosophy at Liberty University. He's the one that you saw. Somebody saw the debate. There were 3 debates that he did, but what happened is Habermas also spent many hours. They became very close friends with Antony Flew. And basically, they would have long dinners before and after the debates and conversations and calls back and forth to the UK. And Gary was with him through the whole process of beginning to question his worldview. And so I asked, since Antony Flew has obviously passed away, I asked Gary, who's a friend of mine, if he'd be willing to come into the club, address the club, and talk about some of the things that aren't in the book, maybe. What were those conversations like? And so I've got a little 3-part, thing. We'll get as much as we can done. I think the first one's about 8 minutes. So you guys will see that and hear from Gary Habermas. Hello, my name is James Walker, and I'm president of Watchman Fellowship, a Christian apologetics ministry, but I'm also the co-founder of the Atheist Christian Book Club. This is a group of about 20 to 30 of us, about half Christians and half atheists, and we meet monthly for a meal together, and we discuss important books from both the perspectives, atheist and Christian. My guest today is Dr. Gary Habermas. He's a historian, a New Testament scholar. He's the distinguished professor of apologetics and philosophy at Liberty University. He's also a leading Christian scholar in the area of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Gary, thanks for joining us.
James, I'm glad to be here with you.
Well, later this week, our club's meeting, and we're going to be discussing this book by Antony Flew called There Is a God. And Antony Flew, of course, was probably one of the 20th century's leading academic atheists, very notorious atheist in academic settings. And he's debated a number of Christians through the years on the topic of atheism versus Christianity, including you. And so we've asked you to come on and talk a little bit about that. Obviously, you made a conversion to believing that there is a God before his death a number of years ago. But you debated him when he was an atheist, but you also developed a friendship with him. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got to know Antony Flew?
Sure. In 1985, I attended a series of debates in Dallas, and it was put together by Roy Varghese. And I think it was called Christianity Confronts the University or something like that. And probably, I mean, I've never heard anything comparable, but in that weekend, might have been like a Thursday night, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, there were about 35 people involved in debates, sometimes 4-on-4, sometimes 2-on-2, but there were a whole bunch of debates on what we have come today to call intelligent design. Is the New Testament reliable? Is morality based on an absolute standard? And so on. And, of course, I'd known Antony Flew's name for many years. When I was in graduate school, when I was in undergraduate school, back in the 60s and early 70s, Flew was just the big name. Now, I didn't go to Trinity, but people who went to Trinity Seminary told me that they couldn't take a philosophy class without Tony Flew's books being required. And so there he was, as big as life, up there on the stage, and he was part of a 4-on-4 debate on God's existence. 4 atheist philosophers, 4 theistic philosophers. And of course, he was the outstanding name on the atheist side. And on the Christian side, Alvin Plantinga was the big name. And so I watched him on stage, and really interesting. And that night, my good friend Terry Meathy said to Tony, "Hey, how would you like to go out and get a bite to eat?" And he said, "Sure." And we walked outside the hotel and down the street to a restaurant. And at that restaurant, Terry initiated a discussion on the resurrection. And Tony and I both kind of jumped in and started talking. And after we talked for maybe 10 minutes, Terry said, whoa, this is going way too well. Why don't we stop the discussion now and not spoil it? And Tony, if we got an invitation for you to come to Liberty University, would you come and debate? And he said, sure. Well, that was in early February or March '85. He came in May, and we had our first debate, which was published in a book by Harper and Row. At that time, they were called Harper and Row, and it was called Did Jesus Rise from the Dead? And so Tony and I debated, and we debated 2 more times. But that was my introduction. I went to Dallas to hear him debate, had the dinner, and that changed into our own debate at Liberty University.
Great. So the debate, and I've got to listen to part of that one. I've listened to the entire, I think it was the second debate that you did on the John Ankerberg show. Fascinating. And I think there was a third debate as well.
A third debate at, I think it was a Veritas Forum at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo on the West Coast at the secular university. And we debated the resurrection once again.
Well, we shared the link, at least to that middle debate, the John Ankerberg show debate, with our whole club, the Atheists and Christians, and I don't know how many have gotten to watch it. But I understand that you actually would spend some time with Dr. Flew off stage? In other words, like after the debate or before the debate. Could you give me a little bit of idea? Give us an idea of what those discussions were like.
Sure. Yeah, he and I actually got to be quite good friends, and it ended up in the last 5, 6 years of his life. He and I would just call periodically. Well, I would call him, and I would call him on the phone. And it got to the point where if his wife answered the phone, she didn't even ask who it was. She just said, "Oh, Gary, I'll go get Tony for you." And that's how it went. And he was sitting in a study like this one, and we discussed. I do remember walking off the stage in the one you're talking about, the John Ankerberg performance, and he and I, as I often say, we went off to do the unmanly thing of taking our makeup off, and they gave us this pink Vaseline goop stuff to wipe off the stuff they put on your face, the powder for television. And as we were walking back to that room, he leaned over. We were alone in the hallway, and he leaned over and said something to me, and I heard him very clearly, but I couldn't believe what I heard. And I said, "What?" And he leaned back over and said it to me again. And here's his words, James. They were so amazing. He said, like it had just dawned on him. He said, "I have no evidence for my position."
Wow.
And I said, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, I have no evidence for my position." And we kept discussing as we walked down the hallway into the room to get the makeup taken off. But I was stunned by his comment that he was apparently used to, like so many philosophies, he was used to doing negative apologetics. You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. Here's where you're wrong, here's where you're wrong. But when someone said to him, "How do you know atheism's right?" which I think he'd been asked, because after that debate, there was Q&A from the crowd who had come to watch the broadcast. And he was asked that question, and it just dawned on him that all he was doing was, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, this wrong. But he never stopped. Here I have been given evidence for the resurrection for a couple hours, and he didn't think he had any evidence to give for his atheism. It was a truly amazing moment to me.
I don't know that I had heard that before anywhere else. I'm sure maybe he's published it somewhere. I had not heard about that part of the conversation. He wasn't. I don't think Flew was trying to say he had no evidence for what he was saying. I think he was just saying, "I've only been giving evidence against theism. I've not really been putting forth evidence." I talked to Gary after the interview a little bit of this too, and I think we addressed it a little bit also in the second part of the interview that Flew he championed this position of the assumption of atheism, that with a eternal universe, given enough time and chance, it's reasonable to expect that everything we see could be explained apart from God. So his argument, that's a brute fact. That's something that we start with atheism, and then it's incumbent upon the theist to bring overwhelming evidence to get us off of that base. And I think when he came to the place where he realized that there's a good possibility the universe is not eternal, then at that point he began to rethink this. Again, I don't want to put words in his mouth on that, but I think that might be part of that story. So what do you think of the interview? Bill, what do you think?
Chris, help us out here, Chris.
Well, I was just trying to look up in the book to see where he was talking about that, because he wrote the book Presumption of Atheism.
Yes,
that was one of his. The way I've always seen described, and y'all can let me know if this makes sense to you now. I mean, I'm not. There's a difference between knowing and believing. Like I would call myself an agnostic atheist. I don't believe there's a God. I don't know there's not a God. But I have not been presented with evidence that convinces me there's a God.
Chris, could you take just a second for us, because that's confused people in the past. I know exactly what you mean, but elaborate on it a little bit. Can anybody really know? Can you really prove any negative? There's no anything.
That's
you'd almost have to have all knowledge.
You'd have to know everything about everything.
Yeah, and that's the principle that atheists use a definition of argue. They also have the colloquial definition of agnostic, of someone who's just not sure, is kind of fuzzy on things. I think that can be confusing also. And you definitely have people who will assert that they know for a fact that there is no God. And if they're making that claim, that's when you need to have evidence for what you're asserting. Just as if you're a theist and say, I know 100% there is a God, you have the burden of proof to present evidence for that position. If you're saying, I don't believe, I might believe if there was evidence presented, but so far nothing's come up, then you don't need to assert anything in that case. You just have to evaluate the evidence.
Does that make sense to everybody, what he's saying? Yeah, it's good.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know if pre-conversion Flew would have described himself as I know 100% there is no God. And
well, he probably wouldn't be a fundamentalist atheist. That we always talk about that.
What's
define what you
ask
mean. Julio.
Okay, Julio, what do we mean by the term? What do you mean by the term fundamentalist atheist? I know what a fundamentalist Christian is.
That topic, so to make me mad.
Oh, really? Okay,
yeah,
never mind.
Yeah, Todd is someone that we and Bill both know, and he always likes to say I'm a fundamentalist atheist because he's like, we get together with other atheists and you do stuff and blah 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 blah.
You got your books.
Almost like a religion. It's like a religion. And
we're canon of like the God delusion, and he'd say Dawkins is a fundamentalist atheist. I think in the book.
But even basically, if you're a strong atheist, then like a strong atheist is kind of like some people you said it's fundamental atheist.
Okay.
Just
Can you give us definition of a strong atheist versus a weak atheist?
Top of my head, I would say Richard Dawkins, for example, would be like a good example of a strong atheist.
But even on Dawkins, I think he would agree with Chris because Dawkins now he doesn't say there is no God. He says there probably is no God.
I don't know if you guys ever heard of the Dawkins scale, like where it kind of like leads to this thing people have been going around about. Where like 1 is like 100% sure you know there's a God. 7 is like you're 100% sure there is not a God. And nobody falls from 1 or 7. We all fall somewhere in between that spectrum.
Where would you put yourself?
6.9.
6.9.
Can we talk you into 6.8?
This might be a good take a break, stretch our legs a little bit. There's coffee in there, I believe. I'll make some more if there's not. And let's come back maybe in about 10 minutes. Does that sound good?